September 4th session of the Cash Patients, Cash Doctor webinar series. You'll notice on the screen we've got our link for you to have people enroll in terms of coming up on some future ones, and then also our channel where we have all of our videos visible. I'll click over there for a quick moment so you can see, and all of them are showcased over here, and there's been some fantastic ones from one week to the next, so I would encourage you to come over here and sift through all of them. And there's really not a bad one in the bunch, but there's certain topics you may have a greater interest in, so definitely have at it. We've got another exciting one coming up in the next week, so before we dig into Charlie today, or Charles I should say, why don't you give us a fast rundown on what's coming up in the forthcoming weeks, Charles?
Assuming Charles Frohman, Mr. Cantor?
Yes, I am officially meaning Mr. Frohman.
Good. Can you switch to the slide on upcoming guests? Or are we doing the introduction first?
I see. No, it's in the wrong sequence. I got to switch it. Sorry. This should have been second. This would have been first.
Great. So, Jeff, as we always do here, we preview guests over the next month, each Wednesday at 7 Eastern. This coming week, next week, we'll have another one of our partner associations promoting us. This from the natural health area, since the cash pairs we make can go allopathic or natural, so it opens up the whole market. The National Health Federation has been around since the 50s, and primarily their two principals, Scott Tips and Kat Carroll, defend natural supplements and pure food from the International Codex body, whose big pharma controllers try to reverse the situation that Scott and Kat are defending. They will present what they're up to at Codex and why they see our cash bears as useful for the growth of the natural market. In 2 weeks, we'll have Steve Hall from an association representing independent birth centers. And again, the cash pairs we create have more options, including standalone specialist centers and natural birth centers. So Steve Hall will introduce this great new option for mothers-to-be who oftentimes aren't that satisfied with their experience in hospitals. In 3 weeks, we'll have yet another direct primary care innovator, Dr. Cynthia Villasees, who will talk about her support of the cash pairs we create and how that plan we have creates an envelope around their primary care practice. Finally, a month from now, we'll have an economist, much like Mr. Sauer today, Mark Wilcoxon, who is a fellow member of ours at the Free to Care group. And he works at Cognizant and HWH Living, and he will talk about improving the provider-patient relationship. And he will also give an economic examination of this cash pay market that we're helping to create. So that is our preview, Jeff.
Jam-packed as usual. Looks pretty exciting. So before we dig into Charles Sauer today, let's do a little fast update and set the context for today. And kind of what's kind of brought us all together is around the idea of liberating the consumer to be a real patient for a change. And so Health Excellence Plus is basically what we're promoting. It's the healthy care strategy. And there's two main things it's making happen. We're empowering the person, which allows innovation in the healer space, or better pricing and markets to work. And therefore, by buying a better health program, you're going to fix the market, because it's down to the doctors and the purveyors as well as the consumers. That's really it. Everything else is just window dressing. And then the programs for anybody, families, businesses, professionals, agents who want to market the program. Everybody's welcome to participate, because the more that we help drive this to a reality, a bigger reality than it is already, the better we're all going to be for it. And it's all going to be available off the Freedom Hub. We'll show you the sites here in a little bit. But meanwhile, here's the biggest issues that we're trying to address. The fact that the cost goes up all the time. There's nothing in it for the patient. Any kind of a network is a limitation. No one really has control of their medical records. All the time you lose between commuting or sitting or waiting or whatever happens. And then there's zero personalized. Everything's a one-size-fits-all mentality. And the one size that fits everybody is that it's expensive. So our whole situation, like we said, is to create this freedom, but you're going to need some help. So you're going to need monies for out of pocket. You know, what if I didn't have a heart attack? What if I didn't have a car accident, but I got a cold and I had this and that, whatever, all kinds of little low end stuff that came up. I need money for that. I'm going to need to have money for something big does happen, and that's where we step in with medical cost sharing in lieu of using health insurance, which is not really a particularly good model for caring about your health because it's not a static item. Your car's static, the house is static, but you're a moving target, so that really doesn't match up to reality quite well. But the most important thing is that you've got a helper, because the reality is most people are not going to become an armchair expert, and they're going to love the freedom to be able to shop around and get the best price, but who's got time to do that? I know the cheap gas on the way to work, so it's no big deal for me to get the cheap gas, but if I got to drive all over the east side of town to figure out where that place is, forget it. I'm just going to go to whatever I know. So building that in makes the whole thing work in one nice little platform that you really can make all occur at once. Now, the key thing is the idea of having this strategy, because you really just can't just only worry about that heart attack, which is ideally what insurance is supposed to take care of, something catastrophic for the most part, but that's only a tiny component, and that doesn't really come up too often, especially if you're under 65. So you're going to need these other issues, and that's what this all contains. And we start out by avoiding everything, because who in the world wants to have any of these problems? So you're able to get all kinds of assessments. We've got artificial intelligence software to help you do diagnostic testing. And then, of course, you want to prevent by using whatever screens or tests you think you need from all those different types of providers like we were discussing. You're going to have doctors available 24 hours a day from all different kinds, from mental to, naturopathic, every kind of little doctor you're going to need to maybe talk to, you're going to have that access. We're going to have ways for you to have monies, and that's another biggie. The fact that you're going to have a direct primary care physician, if you choose that option, we're going to cater to that. And the fact that you're going to have control of your records for a change. And as we mentioned a moment ago about the idea of having a concierge, you're going to have someone to become your expert. So if something does happen, it's all mitigated by virtue of the fact you've got somebody to be at work for you, so you don't have to go out of your way. You can just go about your business and everything gets handled. And then lastly, if something major happens, that's where the medical cost sharing comes in, and we're going to make sure that whatever might happen to you and you end up in the hospital, you're going to limit how much you pay out of your pocket, and I'll show you here in a moment. Now, the way you're going to access all this stuff is you're going to have a couple of formats, but the one you get initially is this card setup. So you're going to have a wallet card and a key fob card. Now, here's where it's exciting, because you'll notice there's a number on here. All you're going to do is call that number, and that's how you're going to be immediately talking to your personal assistant. So you might forget what this thing has in it 8 months from now when something finally goes wrong, but all you have to remember is on my key fob, I got that phone number, and hey, I need to get a drug from overseas. Hey, I need to find a different doctor. Hey, I want to go over state lines to get surgery. Hey, I need to get a better price for an MRI. What? I need to talk to a doctor right now. Whatever it is, you make that one call. Keeps it nice and clean for you as a consumer. And then most importantly is this little QR code. It's a patented code that first responders and emergency room staff can read, and it allows them to see anything that's key about you. They're allergic to a certain medication or whatever, so they can start treating you at the scene of an accident in case you can't speak for yourself. And then beyond that, there's a PIN number for you to have access, and now all your medical records are in there, from when you were born all the way through your genetics or whatever you've chosen to put in there, including your will, so that you're going to have everything with you anywhere you go in the world, or anytime you see a new doctor, everything's accessible and controllable by you. Let's say, as a good example, you have a direct primary care physician. All they have are the records when you see them. But if you end up in a hospital with a major condition they can't work with you on, they're not going to see those records. But because of this tool, you make them a part of your circle of care, and guess what? Everybody's sharing those medical records. And who was in control of them? You were. So again, that's the idea of empowering the consumer. So let's get into some money for a minute. Like in any major situation where I have a heart attack, a broken leg, or some big thing has happened, the bill's going to be, from $20,000 to $500,000 type of a thing. I don't want to have to pay that whole bill. That's the idea behind this aspect of it, is it's protecting my wallet. So I'm going to decide if I'm only going to spend $5,000 towards that heart attack, or as little as $500 and some choices in between. And needless to say, the more I'm willing to pay, the less it costs me per month to have this in place. But the idea is that we want to start freeing up dollars. So whether you pick the $5,000 or the $500 or anything in between, you're going to be at a better price than you are currently. So that's going to free up money for you to be able to put into some of these other tools that will allow you to have money for when you do need to spend dollars to pay that $5,000, let's say, or let's say you just have a $150 doctor visit because you stubbed and maybe broke your toe a little or something type of thing, and it was cheap. You're going to want to pay for that. No cost for that telemedicine, which is a nice low-hanging branch, because middle of the night and my throat's all scratchy. I don't want to run to the urgent care or emergency room and make a phone call. So it makes my life easy. And again, the concierge is just fantastic. And then, of course, like I said, if you have a direct primary care or you're using our virtual direct primary care, you're going to have some kind of everyday services provided automatically inclusive. So you've got a lot of options, in other words. And you're going to need to get all the details on this as we proceed. Now, to set things up a little bit, this is a little bit of an article that was a little segment of an article that was about our program that was in Forbes that John Goodman wrote. But the key here is that they're showing that it had the health savings account component. So there's two key ways you build extra dollars. You're either putting them in the health savings account module, which is a retirement type account, IRS approved. It has a list of things you can spend dollars for, but typically it's in a zero interest account, and we've made arrangements so that the account can actually generate a return in a nice robust way that's going to give you the chance to have growth in those funds as opposed to them remaining static over time, and also some ways to create monies for retirement as well. The other big advantage is to make use of the health matching account program, which is our other add-on that we do. And this does not require a set program. So the HSA, you have to have a very specific version of our program. But with this, you could have a direct primary care physician or more of a emergency only type program or the virtual program. And you can all of them have the HMA. And this thing is good for an incredible list of services. All that are listed is a 213D. You'll see up here the 213D list from the IRS. Any of these services, and the list is far longer than this, that you'll be able to do it for, which is preventative and so on. So it serves a larger list of things than the HSA allows. So these are things that you're able to take advantage of by virtue of the fact that you've switched to a more consumer-oriented program and now have extra dollars to use instead of just squandering them on something you probably never use. Now you're actually doing stuff for yourself on a daily basis. Now there's some little limitations, and we're just sketching over these quickly here. So again, you're going to get all the details. But there's a 1 year, there's a 3 year look back, I should say. But the first year there's zero sharing. So if you have some very severe condition, this is definitely not going to be up your alley. There is a singular surcharge for smokers and some limitations on smoke-related issues that occur later in life. So again, if you're a smoker, this may or may not be a good option. And then the sharing of medications, the way that functions is that during the term of whatever has happened to you, let's say it was 18 months, it took to have a heart attack and get medication and therapy and everything else. And then for an additional 4 months, we're going to pay for or I should say share in the cost of those medications, after which you're going to pay for them on your own, which is why you're going to want to use that HSA or the HMA and the concierge to get better prices. And then, of course, there's a limitation so that you're not going to forever have to reach in your pocket. So if you have 3 episodes in any given year, there's no more out of your pocket. So if you're in that $500 program, that'd be $1,500. And if anything else befell you that particular year, you wouldn't have to pay a penny. So it has a line in the sand, although the chance of having 3 bad things happen in 1 year is pretty remote. But, just in case, there is a built-in little protection. So who's promoting this? Well, interestingly, a lot of different organizations are. We've got health organizations like we're going to have coming up. The National Health Federation has been partnered with us for a long time, and we support them quite a bit in their mission. A lot of trade associations, professional home appraisers, here's the heating and cooling, beauty industry, a bunch more coming off this coming week, in fact. Also some political organizations and activist groups like the Republican Liberty Caucus, which has been very big on promoting the idea of free market medical health care, and others that are in the medical profession themselves. And here, Dr. Ray Cordnoy, he's a long-term American Association of Physicians and Surgeons member. He's a chapter leader for Free Market Medical Association of Florida, and he's been involved for a very long time as well, and definitely appreciates how this model works so nicely in his particular practice. So any questions or whatever, you're going to want to address them up on the site. I'll show you that in conclusion, and then we're going to now open this up for our day today. So this is yourfreedomhub.com. There's information on the health, information for doctors, information on the HMA program, information on the HSA. So pretty much anything you're going to need to know about on there, it's up and in that space. So on that note, let's kind of dig into some of the economics of this and some of the realities of why we need to get to where we're going. So Charles, if you would like to, Mr. Froman, if you would like to do the honors here and do a little quick intro on Mr. Sauer.
Certainly. So Jeff, you and I met Charlie Sauer at a Orlando meeting, I believe, of the Association of American Physicians and Surgeons, I think in 2007 2017 when he was lobbying for them. And he also, before or since, helped found a similar free market medical association. Well, the Free Market Medical Association. So we'll want to hear about that combo there. Two gigantic, important, doctor and other health professional free market medical associations. He is also an author of The Profit Motive, What Drives the Things We Do, and another book, Price Fixing, I think he mentioned. So we'll show the Amazon for both books. He's a contributor at Town Hall and a regular guest on the Tom Hartman radio show. But full time, he's a lobbyist and consultant through the Market Institute. So that is our guest today, Jeff.
All right, sounds like a winner to me. All right, Charles, I'm going to give you the floor here. I'm going to bring up some of these sites pertinent to you in the background, and welcome.
All right. Well, I appreciate being invited, and we met in 2017. I'm glad you brought that up, Charles. It's interesting to me how kind of fast the free market in healthcare is growing. And I know that while we're in it, it doesn't feel fast. It feels like it's a snail's pace. And I've talked to Jeff about this. And part of that is that the sales structure in healthcare and the flow of the market seems to be yearly. So if you think that it's only been a couple of years since then, and you think about how much the free market has grown in just those 2 years, it's pretty amazing. When we started the Free Market Medical Association, and I'm no longer directly involved with the Free Market Medical Association, just to be clear. It needed to get legs and move without me. I'm still friends, and I presented this year at the Free Market Medical Association. I talked to Dr. Keith Smith and Jay Kimpton all of the time. I just so I'm not stealing their thunder, because I think that what they've done since our initial conversations and getting our first 2 years under us, kind of where they've taken it is a testament to how much the market's growing. But I also think a good place to start here, I'm going to start here and then I'm going to go back to kind of why I'm in the position that I'm in, is talking about AAPS and the Free Market Medical Association, because I think that to understand what is going on in healthcare is kind of best understood from seeing these two organizations, because I think that they are both very competent organizations and they're doing good things in what they're doing. And I don't think that it would work well if they necessarily came together, but the Association of American Physicians and Surgeons is focused on two things in my mind, and that is healthcare policy and what affects the public policy that affects the way that doctors interact with patients and the way that the patient and physician relationship is disrupted through those policies. And at the same time, the Free Market Medical Association really couldn't care less about public policy. And instead, what the Free Market Medical Association is all about is bringing the payers and the providers and the doctors and the hospitals and the employers and the TPAs, and bringing all of these people in healthcare and the health sharing guys, bring them all together, and so that they can understand what the market is. And if you get everybody together in one room, you start seeing deals happen really quick. And it was one of the things that in year number one, seeing people that wanted to join the industry meet mentors, and seeing people that didn't understand what one market needed be able to talk it out and create a deal on the spot. And the best part about going back this year was that excitement and that kind of edge and that those business deals were still going on. And in fact, there was more of them. So it was exciting to see. But what you see here is two very good groups that aren't necessarily split, but they're doing different things in healthcare. One is fighting public policy and one is working with the market. And so that is actually what we see on Capitol Hill as well. And Capitol Hill is kind of my specialty. So I started on Capitol Hill with Senator Kit Bond. I would like to say that it's because I was this like great employee to hire, but the fact is that Kit Bond had a competitive softball team, and I was a college baseball player. So, you know, I did that thing where they said, "Hey, do you play softball?" And I was like, "Well, I can hit the ball really well." And they were like, the hiring manager came back and said, "Well, you're hired." And it turns out that not only did Kip Bond like softball players, but he also liked hiring people from my school because we could write. And that turned out to be something strong in my career. But I moved from Kit Bond's office, a great senator from Missouri, to Chuck Grassley's office. He was chairman of the finance committee at the time, one of the most powerful people in the Senate, and I got to learn a lot there as an economist. And from there, I moved out of Capitol Hill and started working for Governor Jeb Bush of Florida. And so if you follow these guys, you might understand where this movement goes. But Kit Bond was a perfect Missouri senator, a strong Republican. Chuck Grassley is a strong Republican, but in an Iowa Republican with a little finance thrown in, so a little bit more towards economics. And then working for Jeb Bush, I got to work more in the economic space and think more like a libertarian and a more free-minded, open-minded space. In fact, if we want to tell a story later, I was actually fired by one portion of his office and kept on the staff through his personal office because I made an economic decision over a political decision. So not ended up being fired. I got to sit at my desk. The people that were paying me weren't very happy with that, but it was a good decision for the governor. So more economic. And then when he left office, I started work for what really brings me here today, which I started work for the National Center for Policy Analysis under Dr. John Goodman. And that was my introduction. That was my full movement from economics to more liberty to an actual libertarian think tank focusing on healthcare. And from there, I got to actually learn healthcare economics, but really how to talk about healthcare economics so that normal people can understand. I've talked to Jeff and Charles, and you know, a lot of times we're able to geek out together and talk about some higher level things. But in general, there's so much education that still needs to take place that just being able to communicate the basics to people, I think, is a really important skill to learn. And so John Goodman taught me that. And then when I started my own business, my first client was the Association of American Physicians and Surgeons. So I love them, and watching what Dr. Jane Orient, for those of you that know her, she's considered kind of the guru, the philosophical leader for a lot of the free market healthcare movement. She's considered the doctor that killed Hillary Care. Keith Smith considers her like his top like free market mentor. So it was a good place to start and a good way to finish kind of my transition over. So what you see on Capitol Hill is that like AAPS and FMMA, the policy and the business parts aren't together, and I don't think either of those organizations should change what they're doing, and I honestly don't think there's room for a third organization. But on Capitol Hill, there's stuff that we could do. On Capitol Hill, there is a healthcare LA and there is a tax LA. And every single time we talk about healthcare policy, it has taxes involved. And so a healthcare LA, they end up just splitting the bill off. So you have like one LA that's looking at the tax sections, which usually don't make any sense out of context with the healthcare legislation. And so we immediately start with a fight in the office, and they aren't talking to each other and they don't get each other, and the healthcare parts largely don't make sense without the tax parts. And so we start from the moment one, because of the way that Capitol Hill is structured, with a structural deficit on how we're going to accomplish healthcare. That doesn't exist in several notable instances. And one of them is probably one of the best projects of my career. I got to write, and I don't, Jeff, we might have talked about this, but I find it funny to talk about now. But I got to write the world's greatest healthcare plan. And nobody can ever take that moniker away from me, because it was actually codified and introduced. Well, it wasn't codified, it wasn't signed into law, but it was introduced as the world's greatest healthcare plan. It was Chairman Pete Sessions and Senator Cassidy's bill from Louisiana, and Chairman Pete Sessions named it, so nobody could argue with him on the name. And so we introduced the world's greatest healthcare plan. And to write that bill, I was talking about it before we started, so if people heard, it took us a year and a half. I was in meetings with Senator Cassidy, and I'm still good friends with his LA, but Senator Cassidy, when he actually kicked his LA out of the room for a moment, and meetings with Chairman Sessions when he kicked his chief of staff out of the room, and he did that several times, to the point where his chief of staff was no longer invited to the meetings to write the bill. And again, both of these are good guys. The staffer that texted me is no longer a staffer. The guy who texted me right before we came on was Senator Cassidy's staff. So we still get along, we still talk, and that's just the way that things actually work. That's part of the sausage on Capitol Hill. But those two offices, they cared about the bill so much that they were just going to keep running over anybody that got in their way. And for them, it kind of manifested in staff sometimes. And in Senator Cassidy's case, the staff wasn't even trying to get in our way. He was just frustrated. And it was a funny thing that we talk about now. In Senator Sessions' case, the chief of staff was against what we were doing for political reasons, which I understood, but I thought we should fight through. And Chairman Sessions knew that we needed to take a risk, that we needed, if we were going to do something good, if we were going to create the world's greatest healthcare plan, that we had to go further than anybody else had gone before. And so you just don't see that very often on Capitol Hill. So I'm a part of like two working groups creating the next piece of legislation, the next Graham-Cassidy bill. And because I'm a part of those groups now, I can almost certainly say that I don't think that they're the bills that are going to go anyplace. I think that they're good placeholders for all of us to maintain conversations so that nobody sneaks up on anybody at the end. But it's hard in Washington, D.C. to have a consensus between these people. And then when you have the think tanks, when you have a John Goodman and a Michael Cannon and a Dean Clancy and Charlie Sauer and Ryan Ellis and David Barnes and Brandon Arnold, when you have all of these guys in a room that all have our different ideas on how healthcare should be solved, it's hard to get us together. But the hardest part for me comes down to the business aspect, and that is the fact that the Health LA and the Tax LA are two different people. And that brings me to my book, which is Profit Motive, which is why this is such a problem. So the motivations of me as a thinker and an economist are largely to have my ideas used in a bill, but also they're largely to get a bill passed and reform the healthcare system. And so that's a part of my motivations. That's also the motivations of John Goodman and Michael Cannon and Dean Clancy and all the others that I mentioned. And so that starts off with this competing interest. But when we move on to Capitol Hill and we see this split between the Health LA and the Tax LA, it actually becomes a problem because their motivation is to move up and to pass a bill or make good tax laws or good healthcare laws. And because of that, we see this major issue in the way that they pass the bills. And because their motivations aren't to help out the other guy, their motivations aren't to necessarily work within the office. And as an individual, their motivation is not necessarily their profit motive. isn't necessarily to get an individual bill passed unless it's their own bill. So every healthcare staffer on Capitol Hill wants their boss to pass their own bill. And if it's somebody else's bill, they have a reason against it. And that's because that makes them seem bigger. It makes them seem more effective. And this makes it just harder to do something. We have what, 435 individual offices on the House side. Each of them are their own little fiefdoms. They have their own bosses, their own motivations, and half of them are supposed to work together to do one thing, and half of them are supposed to work together to do another. And I can tell you there's just not a real motivation for that to work, except for the leadership offices. So when we talk about healthcare, we have to lay out kind of this structural problem on Capitol Hill. And so when I spoke at FMMA this year, that was the whole idea of the speech. And, I think it's up on their YouTube channel. So I haven't gone over much of it here, and I'm not going to go over much of it, but I encourage you to go listen to it, because I get into some of the kind of wonky parts and some of the examples in my book and in healthcare. But the idea is that the profit motives in Washington, D.C. are messed up. And the profit motives, not just in Washington, D.C., when we look at it in general, but the profit motives of the elected officials, the profit motives of the staff, and then the way that the motivations are lined up for the lobbyists and the insurance companies and the hospitals and everything on the outside do nothing but exacerbate those problems and make them bigger and harder. So why am I still smiling and happy and like what I do? On Capitol Hill, it can get frustrating, but I heard an example today that I'm going to steal and use. So if you see this written in I think Forbes in the next couple of weeks, know that that's who I stole it from. But I think it's a good example. It's like in Monopoly. Those people, if you try to save up to buy a hotel all at once instead of buying a house and then another house and then another house and then getting your hotel, I'm happy and understand that now we need to look at taking little bites off the apple. We need to look to make tax law changes that make healthcare a better focused. Maybe that looks like the Cadillac tax. We could talk about that too. We need to make healthcare changes that empower the patients more. And I think the last page that we haven't really visited here is maybe we need to stop bad ideas as they come up too. And so that's stop price fixing. And one of the cool things about Capitol Hill is that although it's frustrating to try to pass good legislation, it's actually fairly easy to stop bad legislation. And so right now we're working to stop a price fixing scheme that's coming through, and the Republicans are working on it. So there's a bill to stop surprise medical bills. So surprise medical bills are a real thing. It's a problem caused by insurance companies. It's a problem caused by bad insurance companies. Doctors are leaving some of the largest insurance companies because, they treat a patient and then they don't get paid for it, or they treat a patient and don't get paid for it for 90 or even more days. That's a problem. And so the doctors leave. So when we go into a hospital, you still want good doctors, and the hospitals still want to hire good doctors. And so sometimes you end up seeing a doctor who is out of network. I believe that that's 5% of emergency medical care is performed by an out of network doctor. So a real problem, a real thing caused by real public policy issues in our healthcare market. But the solution on Capitol Hill is that they want to let the insurance companies set the reimbursement rates for doctors. So Jeff started off by saying that one of the goals of what they're working on is patient empowerment to equal healer innovation. And if you let the insurance companies set the prices that the doctors are getting paid, it's almost the inverse of that, right? Because you're further separating the patient from the doctor. The doctor is getting pounded from the other side and not able to negotiate anything, and the government is the one that's made that decision. And now the patient is just left in the lurch. So lower access to care and a few other things. We know what price controls bring. We all know the long gas lines. It's bad. But what's interesting is how they get there, because it's a real problem. They try to solve it, and they have no idea other than just throwing a blunt instrument at it. But I'm excited because I think that we're at least slowing this down, and or changing the argument, because it looks exactly like a first step towards Medicare for all, which I think just about everybody on this phone call is probably opposed to, because the free market healthcare movement is the opposite of that. I just joined after this whole career of doing free market economics. After talking to all these groups, after founding the Free Market Medical Association, I still hadn't really taken part in the free market of healthcare myself. And so this is my first year in it, and it is fun and scary and good and cheaper and more effective. It's scary because you're used to this one system. And fortunately for me, I had talked about it and understood it and knew the players. And so it's not really scary, but it's just it's the right way to think about healthcare, but it's a different way to think about healthcare. So instead of having prepaid healthcare, we have real insurance. And so I think that as more people get used to this, as the price of healthcare keeps running out of control, more people are going to be excited about what insurance should be, what health sharing has kind of filled that role. And it's amazing to see how well it can work. And we've saved, I don't know, it's thousands of dollars this year alone, and have had no change in the quality of people we've seen, because we were able to see the same exact people. And we have had more access to other things, as Jeff mentioned, like concierge care and telemedicine. I think I have a subscription to like 2 or 3 telemedicine companies that I can call up when I want. If I don't like one, I can call up another. They all kind of work differently. And so it's kind of nice to be able to have that choice and still be saving money. So I really want to take questions. I wanted to lay out my main point here is that I think that we are in a magic age of healthcare where we see the free market growing, and that Capitol Hill is scary and broken, and I'm still going to be up here, so I accept everybody else that wants to come up and fight with me, but we all have to understand that it's broken. We have to understand why it's broken, because that is the only way for us to fix it, is to understand that their motivations are off, that the structure's off, and that to solve it, we need to try to flip the motivations, which we're not going to be able to. But to flip the structure, it's just time consuming. You have to go and hold their hands, bring them together, and walk them down the road together so that they can see the solution at the same time, and why working together is necessary.
Yeah, very good on that. In fact, Charles, and really, is going down that little food chain. So the next in line is the doctors, which they're starting to line up, and then in the end, it's those consumers. And so
Yep.
that's our ultimate audience. And like you said initially, the ability to explain it simplistically to them, and their only thought is what's in it for me. So if it's understood from that perspective, they're glad to make the switch. And frankly, it's an old way of doing business, which is the comical thing about it. You used to just pay the doc and pies and goats or money, and then if you went to the hospital, you either made some time payments or paid them or whatever it was, or then ultimately you had catastrophic insurance and something that took care of that. So it is kind of funny. Although another little quick comment on you having those multiple telemedicine doctor options, that's great because you can call one or the other till you get the diagnosis you prefer.
It's true, but you know they all have those. They work differently. So there's some that you can like text and send emails to, and there's others that you can call and talk to somebody.
Yeah, someone lets you film like a video of your throat and stuff too. So yeah, they are a little different, which is nice. We actually have a hand up, and I would encourage anybody with some questions to do the little hand raise symbol. Paul, I have you unmuted there.
Yes, very interesting discussion. My question, you had mentioned something about tax reform. What if I can ask, were your ideas as far as that?
So the major piece of tax law that needs to be changed is something I alluded to, but the major problem with healthcare is really all goes down to the employer exemption, and we can't go after it right away. And in fact, it's interesting because so if let me explain the employer exemption for if anybody doesn't understand, or the employer exclusion. So if an employer pays for healthcare costs, they don't pay taxes on those, and the employee doesn't pay taxes on those. So what that causes is several things. So first off, like when the unions negotiate benefits, they will often negotiate a higher insurance or higher a higher dollar insurance plan instead of more income, because they can go up $1,000 in insurance, but if they gave the $1,000 to the employee, that $1,000 would then get taxed. So the employee would only see, let's say 800 of it. And so if they do it in insurance, it's 1,000 for 1,000. If they do it in income, it's 800 for 1,000. So it doesn't look like the employer did as much for their employee. And so this causes all sorts of problems inside of healthcare. It's one of the reasons we have employer-based healthcare instead of individual-based healthcare. And employer-based healthcare causes all sorts of problems, like they don't care about long-term care as much because the odds are you're going to leave that employer. So individual care is better. So, but you know, some people still might want employer-based care. I get it, but having the government lean one way versus the other isn't good. And then one of the pieces that is also interesting to this is that with the employer exclusion, the more money you make, the more money off that more spending on healthcare is saving. So let's say you're in the 15% tax bracket, then you're saving 15 cents on the dollar for every dollar your company spends on healthcare for you. But on the other hand, if you're paying 25% in taxes, so you're making a lot more money than the person in the 15% bracket, you're saving a quarter for every dollar your company spends on healthcare. So it's not just like a tax benefit, it's a regressive tax benefit, where it gives, or it's a progressive tax benefit. I don't know. If you're making more money, you get a bigger tax break than the people that are making less money. And that means that companies are more likely to, spend more money on healthcare for their executives. And there's all sorts of weird little nuances that it causes. Now, you can't really get rid of the employer exclusion. And to prove my point on that, the economics on this are fairly clear. You need to get rid of the employer exclusion to make a big difference in healthcare. And the Congress, at least the House just voted, and I can't imagine that the Senate's going to stop it and not vote on it, to repeal the Cadillac tax from Obamacare. So the Cadillac tax has never been implemented, but the Cadillac tax was it was a tax. But it was the only good piece of legislation in the ACA, and that's because it limited the exclusion. And it actually didn't really limit it anywhere good. Like, ending the exclusion is the right way to do it. In the world's greatest healthcare plan, I believe that we taxed. I think that we actually dealt with the exclusion in what was possibly the only politically feasible way. So the Cadillac tax was not the right way to deal with the exclusion, but it actually went after the exclusion and made it so that at a certain point you no longer got dollars for it. It hurt unions, it hurt high-level employees. So it's all Republican. If I was a staffer, I would have told my boss to vote to remove it. There was no political upside to voting to keep it, but that would be my policy idea.
Thank you.
Do we have another hand, Jeff?
Had myself muted there for a moment, didn't realize. I was going to say, Dr. Tinsley, I see that you have your hand up there, and I have you unmuted, in fact.
Yeah, so have you ever thought of combining your efforts with a group like DPC Action, Direct Primary Care Action?
Yep, I have, and yes, I have. I've talked to several of the DPC groups. I'm fairly close with several of the DPC groups. If you listen to my FMMA speech, the groups that I had in mind when I was giving that speech was honestly most of the DPC groups, though. So there's a bill right now on Capitol Hill, and there was a bill last Congress on Capitol Hill that makes direct primary care
On the
intended to
HSA?
make,
On the HSA?
Yes.
So, yeah, DPC Action was on that one.
So, but there's like major problems with the bill. And the way that the Congress came out with it, like several of the DPC groups just blew up right away. They couldn't handle it. And what's interesting is I know that the DPC guys of some of the groups were actually at HHS and at the White House. They just weren't working on Capitol Hill as much. And, you know, you only have so much time. I get it. And I was able to help solve some of the problems for them, help bring some of the people to the table to talk about the problems. But the thing is they were doing something on Capitol Hill with good intentions, but the bills had serious problems. I'm trying to go over the problems in my head.
To put a cap on how much you could spend on DPC.
The cap, and the cap was it was interesting, and the problem is that I know Dr. Lee Gross was really opposed to it, and I was opposed to it as well, but there was some things about the cap and the way that it was worded that it was kind of okay. It's like how much of it was HSA excludable, I believe what was the term. But the thing is on Capitol Hill, it's where the staffer's going to go when they're off of Capitol Hill. They aren't going to go work for DPC Action. There's not enough money there. They're going to go work for the insurance companies or a big business someplace or a large association, which, again, you know, maybe we'll have one of these days. But that is who they're going to look to for information, because they don't want to make those guys unhappy. And so what we got was a DPC bill that looked like it was written by the corporate DPC guys, which isn't even really direct primary care. And they could deal with these issues and not care about some of the ways that DPC was defined in the bill as well. So yes, I like them. The more groups, the merrier to me. I have reached out to some of them. I don't know if I'm too expensive. They're good guys, and I try to help them as much as I can, as often as I can.
Well, they explained to us that I think they capped that at 125, and 125 is really, and we don't want to see any caps at all. I mean, I agree with that, but 125 we can live with for now. And you know, was that not right?
Well, yeah, I mean, look, the fact is, as soon as you put a cap on, you put a cap on so you can ratchet. And you're going to get ratcheted in one direction and one direction only. And to look at that, all we have to do is look at Keith Smith. And one of the reasons you're going to ratchet it is because every time I ratchet it down, I get tax savings, because I'm no longer less HSA funds are getting spent, and if I'm spending less HSA funds, there's less incentive to put funds in an HSA. And because of all of that, there's actually quite a bit of savings in ratcheting that down just a little bit of money.
Well, I see your point. Most of us average around $75 a month, so they're gonna have to do a lot of ratcheting. Plus, we're not that big right now, and this is going to bring a lot of people into DPC that wouldn't normally do DPC.
I just can't disagree anymore with you, Doctor. I'm sorry, but that's like saying what is that? That the government is the one that builds business. Government doesn't build business. Government is never going to be able to bring more patients to anything. I lie about that. Government is bringing more patients to DPC. They're bringing more patients to health sharing, and that's because Obamacare was such a failure that people are leaving it. But to say that government is going to be this major growth area is just not true. Now,
well, government's not doing it. We're doing it, but that's going to give people access to this cash they wouldn't have had before.
Let's do this. Let me interject for 1 sec. Let's open it up for a littlest bit. Dr. Singleton, are you hiding out in the background there? Let's sharpen up the commentary a little bit. All right, why don't you drive in the middle of this for a minute?
Hey, Dr. Singleton.
Hi.
This is Dr. Singleton from the Association of American Physicians and Surgeons, who we've been kind of talking behind her back here a little bit. But sure, what's your take on it? Based on where we're at the moment.
Well, one of the things, my dog, of course, decided to start barking just because I wanted to talk. That once the government gets involved in all this direct primary care stuff, it could really be ruined. I look at the project that CMS started, and they actually use the same initials. And then fortunately, they changed the initials, and they were calling it direct primary care, where CMS was going to give patients some money to pay the doctors, and it kind of defeats the whole purpose. And come in with various rules and whatnot, and that I found very scary. I mean, the same, I haven't seen the follow-up, and I don't know whether you know, Charlie, when University of Michigan was going to start a DPC model, and I read about that last year, last April, and haven't seen follow-up. And it's hard to know what happens when it gets too big. If you see what I'm saying, having the multiple small practices do their individual direct care versus suddenly it becomes another conglomerate, and it's like it's an ACO for direct primary care. And then to me, that just ruins the whole concept of having your nice, quiet, private doctor. The other thing is, and when you were talking about the bill, there's a couple of things in there that are bad, in that it does favor CVS, and especially now, I don't know, you heard the hot news today that the CVS-Aetna merger was formally approved by the judge today. So it's a done deal. That HSA legislation seems to favor CVS, these drugstore one-stop shop type affairs. And that's a scary thought. And of course, now that the drugs and the medical care will all be merged together, that's not a good thing for the private practitioners. And so that's one bad thing. And then the other bad thing, and it was brought up, the caps on the DPC monthly fees might shut out specialists. And there's folks like endocrinologists and cardiologists who basically have become the primary care doctor for many patients, particularly these diabetics, and then also some neurologists, people who have multiple sclerosis and whatnot. They only go to their neurologist, and the neurologist takes care of the workaday stuff. So you'd certainly need to have a higher cap if specialists want to use the DPC model.
Excellent point.
I'm mishearing from you, Dr. Singleton, and it's fun to it's fun to hear from you in this setting, and I can't agree with you more. For the sake of argument, I want to. No, I'm just joking.
Oh, Charlie, you'll never change.
Getting government involved, I think the chiropractors would speak for this. They thought it was going to be a boon for them, and they are now locked into some government areas where they don't want to be. I think that DPC works in part because you can fire patients. I don't think that if you're taking government money that you'll be able to fire patients, even though it's not in the bill yet. It's going to be something that's going to end up in there. I want more DPC practices around the country. I think that they are amazing. I think that DPC should be HSA eligible. I don't think that now is the time. Capitol Hill has no idea what DPC is, and it's going to be another, generation of doctors and generation of staff or two before they actually understand what it is. I have a famous speech that I gave in a healthcare meeting on Capitol Hill, and it was about half staff and half think tank people. And I was getting ready to go down to, I think it was the first Free Market Medical Association conference. And I stood up and said, for the staff, you don't have to listen to this. And for the think tank people, I just want you to know that I'm getting ready to go down and spend 3 days with the people on the cutting edge of healthcare that are empowering patients through the free market, and the staff just, they didn't even like get mad at the joke. They just weren't even listening, didn't pay attention. There was no follow up. They still don't understand the free market, and so that's the problem. Even though we support good stuff and the bill is well intentioned, since nobody understands it, it's super easy to roll it over. And again, the healthcare staffer is not the one writing the HSA bill.
No, I think I see your point. Since an HSA is technically, it's a person's savings account, but it's government money. Once you put it in there, that's going to open me up to a lot of things government. I don't think I'm not going to go down that road.
I like it. That's a good.
No. It just kind of jogged my memory, because that means anybody that comes in and speaks anything but English, I'm going to be liable for their interpreter now. If I take any HSA money.
And there's a question of whether on the passage of that bill, whether that would be the truth or not. But I can tell you that if you start turning away people, and DPC doctors will, that will become something. And the easiest change to fix that is that you have DPC qualified, you just add that in. So even if you're not scared of the ratcheting, which I think you should be, the government part is a huge issue.
Jeff?
Yeah, I was just going to say that, and again, that's one of the key reasons that we've got partnered up with the HMA, because it's a private way to have funds, for that good reason right there. We sort of have a little limitation because it's only towards the stuff what the IRS has, but the list they give us, like everything they can imagine to all the way up to over the counter, because you'll notice when they made it HSA, they took that list, they trimmed it way down to stuff that was more suitable for insurance companies and other big vendors of durable equipment, and just like that casual over the counter stuff, oh, the heck with that, they're going to go buy that anyway. So they didn't even need to take advantage of carving that out to help the person. So they're not looking out for anybody on any front. So that was great. We've run out of time. Yes, Charles, you have a little closing question you'd like to?
Yeah, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Charlie, Mr. Sauer, as a new sharing member, one of a million or so. Do you talk about that with other high-level activists, advocates on Capitol Hill, think tanky type people, or is sharing still sort of a niche thing? I mean, it is really old-time mutual aid, so it has a long history, and it's like a credit union, so it's substantial and has legs. It's got to be part of the discussion, but it's like when I was lobbying for the credit unions, it's 2% of the market compared to the big banks, right? So sharing is like tiny compared to big insurance. Where do you kind of insert yourself as a real live example of this new way of empowering patients?
So I talk about it, and I talk about it fairly frequently. But one of the most interesting conversations that I have is with Ryan Ellis. If nobody's familiar with him, he was the old tax guy at Americans for Tax Reform, and he's now off on his own. But him and I were both facing these rising healthcare costs that didn't make sense. We could both had a knowledge of the healthcare system and the ability to take not a risk, but make a jump and be okay with whatever we were doing that was going to be different. And he ended up choosing a different model than I did. And so we've been talking about our different tax advantages and the problems with each of the systems. And so I can tell you, learning wise, I've had probably the best conversations with him. But when we're talking about healthcare policy in some of these rooms, most of the people in the room not only aren't in the individual market, but they haven't, well, most of them aren't in the individual market. So they might understand what is going on in the individual market, but they don't understand necessarily how it works or how the market feels, because the insurance market is kind of personal. And so sharing my stories about why I've made the decisions I've made, and what that looks like. And, they still look at me like I'm kind of that, the weird guy in the corner of the room when I talk about it, but that's okay, because I'm the first guy talking about it. If you've never seen the video, there's the shirtless guy dancing video. If you Google it, you go shirtless guy dancing leadership. That'll get you into a good part of the internet. But there's a crazy guy dancing in a field, and then a few seconds later, somebody else joins him and he teaches him how to do it. And then by the end of the video, there's like 30,000 people dancing at this field. And admittedly, shirtless guy number one is probably on drugs, but that's okay. He was out on his own, and I feel like really I'm the second guy to him, and I see the market. I understand what it's doing. I understand that it works. And so they still look at us like we're weird, but they're ready to join us. And you just have to be willing to, talk to people about it. The more you talk to people about it, the more socially acceptable it is. And the more that people will see that it works. And it's, as you said, it's the mutual aid societies. It's the way that insurance should work. And because of federal laws and the way that those have worked with healthcare, it just doesn't anymore. And so this is a way to bring it back to the way that healthcare should work.
That's great. And how can folks help you with the Market Institute? What are you looking for there?
Well, I'm looking for people to buy my book. We haven't talked about it too much, but Profit Motive, what drives the things we do. But follow me on Twitter, follow us on Facebook, and push the writings around. The more that people read about free market healthcare, more that people read about free markets, the better off that our market will be, and the better off your businesses will be, and the better off this whole healthcare sharing thing is going to keep growing and keep evolving into the future.
That's great.
Well,
you have a Facebook page or something, or some kind of feed?
Well, he's up on his Market Institute. I had that site up there, and I'm going to publish the link.
I'm sorry, I missed that. Okay.
When we release this, I'll put the links up too, but here's the site here.
My Twitter's
Okay,
Charles Sauer.
Okay.
So, but I'll put some links at the end of the recording for sure. So, Charles,
Okay.
I was going to say, if you want to kind of close us out here, just a little quickie recap on what's coming up next week, and we'll rejoin
Sure.
everybody then.
Sure, Jeff. You're going to put the other slide back up.
Yeah, there we go.
Next week, we have one of our promoting associations, the National Health Federation. Scott and Kat will talk about why they like us for how cash payers support the natural health market, not just allopathic, and their work protecting our supplements and natural products from the International Codex food regulator. No one knows about it. It's critical. In 2 weeks, we'll have natural birth centers, not just hospitals for your baby, with Steve Hall. Another DPC in 3 weeks. We have so many supporters there, Dr. Villasese. And finally, and another economist like Charlie Sauer, Mark Wilcoxon, will actually give us an analysis of this so-called cash pay market. That's our preview, Jeff.
Sounds like a winner to me. All right, everyone, I will see you next week. I really appreciate you being here and taking some good quality time with us. But as you can see, this is pretty important. And at some point, every one of us gets to be a patient. So it is personally important to every single person.